You know, we're told we can't have anarchy because we don't want a situation where a mob can just come in and take your money whenever they want and leave you with no recourse. Gee, wouldn't it be terrible if we were already living that reality? At least for some people, it is. Carl and Amy Sturmer Nelson found that out the hard way when the FBI seized $1 million from them in May of 2020. Yes, right as the pandemic were going, forcing them to sell their house and their car, liquidating their retirement funds, and moving their family of 6 from a comfortable West Seattle home to Amy's sister's basement. And as Amy says, we went from living a life where we were both working full-time to provide for our 4 daughters to really figuring out how we were going to make it month to month. It's completely changed my belief in fairness. Yeah, what a way to be blackpilled, right? Jeez. Talk about being thrown in the deep end. And they even took the savings Amy got from her decade as a practicing attorney and from her later efforts as head of the Riveter, even though the FBI never even suspected Amy of committing any crime. It was only Carl they were investigating, and there has been no conviction, no charge, no indictment, nothing 2 years later. So what happened was in April 2020, agents showed up at the Nelsons' home and informed them that Carl, who was a former real estate transaction manager for Amazon, was under investigation for allegedly depriving Amazon of his honest services. They accused him of showing favor to certain developers and securing them deals in exchange for illegal kickbacks. But Carl says, that never happened, and is exactly why I've fought as long and hard as I have. It's that simple. But if the FBI has come to the conclusion that he has, then they're not acting on it. It's been years. There's no indictment, but they didn't need one to completely ruin their lives, forcing them to leave their home, their community, their jobs, their girls' place in their Seattle school, and their security for the future. And the sad part is the FBI actually did, in a way, concede that they didn't need to do any of that to complete their investigation or hamstring any criminal operation, because the government finally agreed to a settlement. They'll return $525,000 of the money. Amy and Carl still forfeit $109,000. The extra amount is gone because of court fees. Really, the courts are making out about this. And they're still getting over $100,000. I mean, if they had just seized $100,000 to begin with, that would have been bad enough. So they're trying to recoup their losses via GoFundMe. Unless someone decides that they're politically inconvenient and they get kicked off of GoFundMe, as we've seen happen more than once. So Amy says, not much has changed for us. Carl is still a defendant in a massive federal lawsuit against Amazon, and they accepted the deal so they'd have the money for attorney's fees. It feels like the beginning of some justice. Yeah, but justice still means they're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, here's hoping they have a good lawyer with some fight in him. Maybe you could countersue or something. But I've given plenty of examples of this in the past on my podcast and here on YouTube. And Billy Binion gives some others here, like the Indiana man whose car was seized, the Kentucky man whose car was seized, the Massachusetts woman whose car was seized. Are you starting to notice a trend here? The Louisiana man whose life savings were seized, and the Texas man whose life savings were seized, and the countless Californians whose money and random possessions were seized. Sometimes the money is returned, usually when a defendant manages to lawyer up for a civil suit. Sometimes only part of it is, sometimes none of it is, usually it's none. And Dan Albin, an attorney for the Institute for Justice, another awesome organization I've covered several times, he says, civil forfeiture is still quite common. The fact that the government can do this can obviously ruin lives. And it can ruin lives without anyone being convicted with a crime, without anyone even being charged with a crime. And that's the sort of thing Amy points out. She says, quote, if you can't afford to defend yourself, let alone feed yourself, it becomes complicated. But make no mistake, civil asset forfeiture is a $1 billion a year industry. State, local, and federal governments have seized $68.8 billion over the last 20 years. And according to Albin, the vast majority of seizures and forfeitures are driven by the profit incentive. In most states and at the federal level, Police and prosecutors get to keep up to 100% of the proceeds, so they just have a very strong incentive to go out and seize whatever they can and try to forfeit it so they can supplement their budget. And so that goes into police slush funds, buying things like submachine guns, all sorts of weird cash withdrawals that no one seems to be able to explain, or even used illegally on things like gym equipment and Fitbits. Now there's a money laundering ring if you're looking for one. But Amy said to Binion, "Even talking to you now, Billy, now that we have our money back, now that the government has said we don't believe these are the proceeds of a crime, I am frightened of retaliation. I am frightened of saying anything, because this is incredibly scary." Yeah, and this is the world we live in. Maybe it'll get worse before it gets better, but I have to believe it'll get better. So thanks so very much. Comment for the comment, God, cherish for the share throne, hit like, subscribe, and the bell, and please go to donate.bogosity.tv for all sorts of ways to keep me doing what I do, including PayPal, crypto, and becoming a regular supporter at Patreon and Subscribestar, and getting these videos early and ad-free, joining the live stream, and all sorts of other benefits. Thank you very much. Until next time, stay strong and be free.